Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Svarim Chatter podcast. On this episode of the podcast, I'm going to be joined by Rabbi Moshe Taragin, who is a Ram in Yeshivat Har Etzion, otherwise known as the Gush in Eretz Yisrael, and we'll be discussing October 7th and its aftermath, something that we are the year anniversary, unfortunately, and it's still with us. It's still ongoing. And Rabbi Taragin's written extensively on this, and a lot of his articles, if you will, have been included in a book that he published, Emuna Mitaycha Astara, Dark Clouds Above, Faith Below, published by Kodesh Press, as well as, and something else that we're going to get to related, is a new book. Either it's released, but it won't not necessarily available at the time of this podcast being posted, which is called Reclaiming Redemption, about the Geulah, which is published by Mosaic Press. So thank you, Rabbi Taragin, for joining me.
Thank you, Nachi, for hosting, and there'll be better days. We'll meet each other in Yerushalayim, glimpsing the sunrise over the Har Habah.
Be'ezus Hashem. So let's start off. Tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and your background.
Pretty standard background. I grew up in Brooklyn. I went to the Kamenetz Yeshiva, went to Camp Munk. I'm sure they'd be interested in me mentioning that. And then I studied in the Gush Yeshiva with Aaron Lichtenstein for a couple of years. Went back, got a degree in YU. Went back and learned more in the yeshiva. I made Aliyah with my family in 1993. And Baruch Hashem, I 8 children in Kanaan Hara, a lot of Eniklach, living in Eretz Yisrael, everyone, Baruch Hashem. So that's the short end.
Right. So first of all, with October 7th, I mean, this is a Svarim Chatter podcast. This is not a history podcast. Well, sorry, this is a history podcast. This is not a current events podcast or a politics podcast or things like that. That's not what we're going to be discussing, but we're discussing more theological things and themes and that arise out of October 7th and its aftermath. And the first thing really is that, you know, you've written a lot on October 7th and you write all the time. You write a column, I believe, weekly, monthly. And so why write about these things about October 7th? Why write about these themes?
It's a great question, and I'll just backtrack for a second, because before we try to tease out themes and ideas, it's so important to realize that as we're sitting here recording this a few weeks before, as your listeners are listening to it, discussing the ideas and the themes, there's so many people that are still suffering and crying, and empty seats on Rosh Hashanah, and people that haven't lived in their homes, mifunim, evacuees. Ideology and ideas should never precede sympathy and crying with people. I remember about 35 years ago, I once interviewed a boy for yeshiva, and he asked me where the best boys are going. I said, I don't know. If I did, I wouldn't tell you. But I asked him, what does it mean to be a best boy? So he said, the boy that learns the most Gemara and the Daven's the best. So I said, it's good, but this was when there were 2 helicopters that took off in northern Israel in 1985, and they crashed. In 74, 72 soldiers were killed in a flash. And, of course, we thought it was apocalyptic until October 7th, which dwarfed everything in the rearview mirror. And I asked the boy how he responded to it. And he said Tehillim, which was, of course, an adequate answer. I told him, I said, my wife and I sat in front of the TV, and we watched 74 Levias in 48 hours, mother after mother shrieking about her child, throwing herself on the grave and screaming to Shemayim. At some point, I turned to my wife and said, I can't do this anymore. I don't have any more tears. I'm depleted. We shut the TV. I asked the boy, is the ability to cry when Am Yisrael suffers, is that part of your avodas Hashem? Is that part of being a good boy? He said that it wasn't. He said, come to Eretz Yisrael with this feeling of Am Yisrael and the struggle that we have to rebuild Eretz Yisrael is much more real. So I'm happy to answer your question, but before anyone jumps to ideas, there's so much suffering and sadness and pain and agony. And when you daven this year, you're listening to this after Rosh Hashanah, but possibly before Yom Kippur, ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu, say Laman, I mean it. I believe this is not a war. This is a transitional moment in Jewish history. Hester Panim doesn't mean Hashem isn't authoring, just means that he's authoring it in ways we can't understand. Geulah Shechina is when it's clear, when it's obvious, when it's transparent. Hester Panim is when it's cryptic and mysterious. It's obvious that no person will be the same after October 7th. It's obvious that this is the event of our lives. Our grandchildren will ask us about this event the same way we ask our grandparents about the Holocaust. Not to compare the two, but they'll ask us how we responded to this. And I also wanted to empower people that are not in the front line, serving the army and in tanks and holding guns, or even living in Eretz Yisrael, because it's a war with so many tiers, T-I-E-R-S, not just tears, T-E-A-R-S. Everyone has a role. When you daven, if you can restore Malchus Shemayim, which I think has been corrupted, if you can have courage in the face of anti-Semitism, because courage is part of Emunah, if you can understand why the culture is broken, then you're bringing Malchus Shemayim back to a broken world. So I wanted people to feel like they shouldn't be confused because there's so many confusing parts to this war. What's happening? How do we look back to Chazal, look back to Tanakh, look back to our past, and create meaning and empower people to be part of the process?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very important part, and that's something that you write about Emunah in the wake of tragedy, especially seeing October 7th. You mentioned the Holocaust. You mentioned the countless other tsaras, unfortunately, throughout Klal Yisrael's history that we can go on and discuss. And having Emunah, and this is a big part of it, especially October 7th, and something that is ongoing. As you say, you don't like to refer to it as a war, but this is something that is still with us at this time. So there's really a number of things. There's a bunch of things that you discuss in the book that we can touch on. I mean, there's so many different things to talk about October 7th, related. But one thing is there's some interesting, broader themes and concepts. It's something that you discuss is religious issues. Is this, religious war or not? That's something you discuss, and especially Yiddishkeit versus Islam and Islam's fundamentalism and their conception of God versus our conception of Hashem.
Look, there are a lot of levels to that, but I think the key level, first of all, before any ideas are discussed, any attack on Am Yisrael is an attack on HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's what our Chazal say. We're HaKadosh Baruch Hu's proxy. We represent him on this earth. They can't scale the heavens, so they attack us. It could be in Poland, it could be in Russia, it could be in France. It's a Chilul Hashem. And when that attack happens in Eretz Yisrael, on Simchas Torah, on Shabbos Kodesh, then the Chilul Hashem, even before you get to what ideas are discrepant between us and radical Islam, HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence was defiled. HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence was, when we ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu, this Rosh Hashanah, Hashem's presence took a step backwards in this world. Not obviously Hashem is Meloch Haaretz Kivodo, but in human comprehension. So that, and I think it was very evocative of 50 years ago when our enemies tried to weaponize Yom Kippur. I mean, look, the fact they attacked us in Yom Kippur was also Chilul Hashem, and they thought that they could leverage Yom Kippur, Kiddush Yom Kippur, and that's why we were able to defeat them, because in Shemayim, it's inconceivable that Yom Kippur be used against us. In terms of specifics, there's so many. I'll just discuss what I feel is the primary one. Avram Avinu, our Zaidi, was the first person to realize that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Malei Rachamim. He didn't sense the Rabbanu Shalom through nature. Greeks see nature. Avram saw Rachamim. He saw a world that was carefully calibrated to support life. If our world would be a few kilometers closer to the sun, we'd incinerate. If we're a few kilometers further from the sun, we'd freeze. Avram senses, Chazal say, a bira dolekas, a palace of life and of light. And he knew that there was a compassionate author to this world, and he wanted to know him, and he wanted to be an agent of chesed, like HaKadosh Baruch Hu that he saw. Remember, for 2,000 years, you and I, we read Bereshis and Noach in 2 weeks. Bereshis and Noach is 2,000 years of human history. For 2,000 years, people thought that their gods were grotesque monsters in heaven with fangs and teeth that toyed with their human beings as playthings. And Avram discovered a Kel Melech Yoshev L'Kisei Rachamim. And that's the Masar that we gave not just our people, but all of humanity. And when you depict God as angry and vengeful and happy when innocent people suffer and bloodthirsty, and unfortunately, they're hijacking the face of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in this world. If you ask 10 people, what do they associate with religion? Not Jews, but 10 people on the street, they'll say death and murder and horror. So we're defending Malchus Hashem. When we say this year on Rosh Hashanah, that we're we're literally, and that's something that I can do in Alon Shvud, and you can do in Lakewood, by having clarity when you say these psukim, when you daven, to understand that these psukim are now contemporary. They're not ancient psukim from thousands of years ago.
Yeah, that is something that we always see with Islam. You mentioned you see their jihad, and we have Kiddush Hashem. That's another thing to talk about the comparison. And you can talk about that, or not really the comparison, the differences. But as you say, the average person, especially in today's a lot of the irreligious world, if you will, they think that they equate religion with violence, and that's really not what Yiddishkeit is about at all.
Look, you raise a crucial point, and I think it needs to be clarified because it's even more murky than the first point. Jihadism is a culture of death. Every fundamentalist Muslim wants to die to get 72 virgins. None of us have a death wish. I'll say this as clear as I can. There are 3 things I'm willing to die for: HaKadosh Baruch Hu, my people, and my family. I don't have a death wish. I hope to live a long life, and I hope to live a life for all of those values. But if you're not willing to die for something, you're not yet living for anything. And if you live for it more than yourself, you have to be willing to die for it if push comes to shove. And that's the entire difference between jihadism and lahavdil Kiddush Hashem. The psukim about Kiddush Hashem don't mention death, especially Rabbi Kiva's pasuk. What's Rabbi Kiva's pasuk? Where does it mention death? You live a life of avas Hashem, afilu hunotos nafshecha. Even if it gets to the point, but that's not what we're looking for. We're not looking for death. No one has a death wish. We're a culture that celebrates life. It's such an important difference, and people muddle the two because they're both dying, for some higher divine purpose. Chalila v'chas. Hashem doesn't want us to die. Hashem wants us. Mesiras nefesh doesn't mean death. It means giving your nefesh to the Rebbeinu Shalom, even if it's the last action you take.
And that also ties into their conception of the afterlife and the world to come.
Yeah. Well, see, you did your homework. Look, when Yitzchak is selected from Yishmael, the Torah writes, Keep be Yitzchak with the base. Chazal Darshan Beis. Why is Yitzchak selected? Because Am Yisrael believes in two worlds, Beis Olamos. So be Yitzchak. Now, you and I both know we're not the only people to believe in an afterlife. There are many religions and cultures. What makes Yiddishkeit so robust is that Olam Habah for us starts here in this world. How does the Rambam describe Olam Habah? Chachamim Yoshvim. That's the same. You know what Olam Habah is? The same thing Olam Hazeh, without the hindrances and obstacles of being tired, hungry, physical, desires, lust, weakness, politics, society. But everything we're doing in this world is Olam Habah. It's a continuation. It's one world, and that's why Yitzchak is chosen, because he unites the world. And what's so important about the view of Olam Habah is then it affects how you live Olam Hazeh. Let's say I told you there's no Olam Habah. Would you stop doing what you're doing? Of course not. Because this is the best life you could lead in this world, even if there weren't an Olam Habah. So your vision of Olam Habah affects the way you serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu in this world. And as the Rambam says in the Cheshuva, Oses emes of Neshu emes. You do what's right because it's right, and then Olam Habah is a continuation of everything you've accomplished in this world. So your vision of Olam Habah isn't just what's going to happen on Me'av Yesrim. Vision of Olam Habah affects, are you in this world holding your breath for 120 years just to get to your reward in the next world, or you're living Olam Habah with limitations and struggles and challenges. The notion that you could kill people in this world and use that as your ticket of entry into the next world, that disassociates the two worlds. The entry for the next world is a crime in this world, as does the 72 versions, Mishigas. That's what we're living for, 72 versions? That's your ultimate goal? That's your spiritual endpoint? So it's not just your vision of Olam Habah, but it affects how you live Olam Hazeh. And our strength as Yidden is we live Olam Hazeh. That's why the Torah doesn't mention Olam Habah once, because it doesn't want to sell out this world as meaningless just to get to your 72 versions, Chas v'shalom.
So how do we fight against this?
Clarity. We'll say in Mitzvah Hashem Wednesday night, we want Hashem to enter the Pischei Olam. That's what you're saying. How do we get the Rebbeinu Shalom to enter the Pischei Olam? You can't control that. I can. I'm trying to write articles, but whatever. Who can? What we can control is Pischei Halev. Can you let the hardest Pesach to open? Can you let the Rebbeinu Shalom come into your heart? For HaKadosh Baruch Hu to come into your heart, you have to have clarity. These things have to be very clear to people. Every time you say, Mitzvah Shem Rashanim Kivus Kitaver Memshelas Zadom Min Haaretz V'Chala Risha Kula Ki Ashan Tichla. Know what you're saying. When you say Afar Dagon Zecha, know what you're saying. V'Yedekapal. We are living those tefillos, and if I say them and mean them, I promise you, you're bringing HaKadosh Baruch Hu into this world. Because there's a front stage to history, there's a backstage to history. The front stage is politics, war, diplomacy. The backstage is metaphysical. What you and I are doing to restore Malchus Hashem.
Now, what we're discussing there really has to do with anti-Semitism, and that's something that we've seen rear its ugly head once again, especially what's going on throughout the world and the United States and Ivy League campuses and all over. And this is, again, stuff that you've written about and discussed, and this is really worth discussing here, is what roots lie behind it, besides obviously Esav Sones Yaakov, but also, and first I'll leave it at that, and then I'll follow up after.
Oh, look, it's obviously the question on everyone's minds. It's what I said before. We believe in the Chira Chafshis, and every anti-Semite has a decision to make whether they want to hate or embrace, whether they want to kill or not. But we also believe that there are larger metaphysical forces in the Bria that HaKadosh Baruch Hu implanted that are inevitable. And how exactly those medical forces in Bechira Chavsha stack up is HaKadosh Baruch Hu's algorithm. Hashem is a good mathematician. Mashal ma davar doma, Geulah is inevitable, right? You and I both know that Geulah is going to come no matter what. But the pace and the texture and the way that Geulah comes is totally up to human decisions, and not just human decisions, not just Jews, other people. Hitler, Yimach Shemo v'Zichro, had something to say about the trajectory of how we're going to reach Geulah. I don't know how, but he made a free choice, free will. So you can trace anti-Semitism sociologically and politically and ethnically and economically and historically and where it comes from and fear of the other. But as you said before, Chazal say, I'll quote a Gemara that's even more, in my opinion, powerful than Allah Esav Son of Yaakov, the Gemara in Shabbos. Lama Nikra Shmo Sinai. Why have all the names of Har Sinai did HaKadosh Baruch Hu choose Sinai, not Chorev, not Har Elokim? Sheyarda Sin Olam. That's when they started hating us, because we call the world to higher ground, and people don't like a whistleblower. My Rebbe, Rav Yehuda Amital, who was a survivor of the Holocaust, used to tell us the following story. There was a person named Mendel in the shtetl, whose job it was to wake everyone up during Chodesh Elul for slichas. And Mendel was relentless. And if you decided to sleep, he pulled your legs and he threw water on you and he tickled you till you got up. It's now Rosh Hashanah. Everyone's exhausted. They're saying slichos, and Mendel is so tired he's falling asleep. So everyone starts saying their machzor and throwing it at Mendel to wake him up. So Mendel looks at them and says, bleary-eyed, I'm exhausted. Can't you let me sleep? I'm exhausted. So they all look at him and say, Mendel, you kept us up all Chodesh Elul. You think we're going to let you sleep now that it's Rosh Hashanah? So we're Mendel of the world shtetl for thousands of years. We stood for something beyond savagery, beyond cannibalism, beyond voodooism. We stood for HaKadosh Baruch Hu with all the values that stem from that: family, community, logic, reason, dignity of life. And we challenged the world to be their better selves. At a certain point, that's going to create hatred, especially if you're living amongst it. Remember, living in Lakewood is plan B. Plan A is we're all in Eretz Yisrael, living this model for everyone to see without the abrasion that comes when you're living amongst them and you're being hosted by them and you happen to be bright and economically well off and community oriented. And you're not just living amongst them, but you're saying, and by the way, follow us. We have a message for you implicitly that it's going to redeem your life. So it's a combination of standing for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but in particular, being cast into Geulah, where we continue to play our role, but under very difficult conditions.
So although this is really for a separate podcast or full series about Zionism and religious Zionism, but at least for this context, how do we look at anti-Semitism versus anti-Zionism? Especially that's been the thing, saying, oh, I'm not an anti-Semite, I'm just an anti-Zionist.
Again, just for the listeners, because maybe we'll talk about my Sefer a little bit later on, but I just want to make sure I say this. Part of why I wrote the Sefer on Geulah is because I deeply believe, and I hope I'm proven right, so everyone who listens to this, please buy the Sefer. I believe that 80% of the issues of Geulah, 80% of Am Yisrael agrees with. If we could just say that 80% of what Geulah means and what's happening in our world with the return of Am Yisrael to Eretz Yisrael, 80% of Am Yisrael believes in that 80%. What happens is we spend most of our time clobbering each other ideologically over the 20% we don't believe in, which is really Milsa Zudrasa. Is it Reishis Bichas Geulah Seinu? Is it not? I don't know. To me, that's a cryptic phrase. It's a metaphor with a qualifier, or Tzmicha, Reishis. There's so many issues to explore. So I'm assuming your question, anti-Zionism, you don't mean in the ideological sense as opposed to Neturei Karta or Charei Shevel. You mean as the world sees it, anti-Israel.
Correct.
Okay. They're definitely not the same theoretically. Namely, a person who can take a stance, it's a naive stance, and that's why there's some Jews that are as they would call themselves, anti-Zionists and not anti-Israel. They're anti the decisions to have a Jewish state. But practically, they're the same, because history has proven that without the state of Israel, Am Yisrael, I'm not going to say it can't survive, because Har Bishluchim Lamakom. Obviously, to say a statement like that, Am Yisrael can't survive. Am Yisrael isn't going anywhere. But in terms of practically, without being samech alaneis, without throwing it all to HaKadosh Baruch Hu's lap, without a Jewish state, you wouldn't be secure in Lakewood. I won't be secure. At some point, you're going to have to move to Eretz Yisrael, your grandchildren. And not just that, but I believe that the fact that we have a state of Israel, when did Lakewood become Lakewood? That's a very charged question. But in my opinion, the flowering of the Torah world, not just Lakewood, in part stems from 67. I'm old enough to remember pre-67, Jews lived in the aftermath and the shadow of the Holocaust. They were embarrassed. They were bent over. They were afraid. They were fearful. Once we had komamius, and that's not a political statement, komamius. It's just once we had Jewish pride, Yidden, when they have pride, they start to build Torah, and people start to build Torah. So I think that all the yeshivos are a part of having a country of Israel where our people have gathered and restored our national pride.
How has modern culture played into a lot of this? Baruch Hashem, I finished law school before this started in the sense that I wasn't on campus and, besides wasn't on a campus anyways, that some of these things have been going on, we've been seeing. But it's not only in campuses. I mean, really, we've seen modern culture, what's happened. And how has modern culture affected this?
With your permission, because it's an important question. I think this is what confuses a lot of people. Seeing homosexuals supporting Gaza, supporting Hamas, if they stepped in, seeing Asian students who don't even know where Palestine is protest. But with your permission, I want to take a step back because it's important. We have three roles. Am Yisrael has three roles. We challenge the world to monotheism, to believe in Hashem Echad. We challenge the world to morality, chesed, rachmanas. The third role that we have, which is a little bit more subtle, is sometimes a culture breaks. It doesn't mean they become Rishayim, but there's something very decayed about the culture. So, for example, in Parshas Noach, the Parsha begins with Migdal, with Dara Mabul. That's a degenerate culture. They kill each other, Hamas, murder, they take their wives. But the end of the Parsha is Migdal Bavel. What's wrong with Migdal Bavel? They're collaborative, let's build a city, let's take people in, let's manufacture houses. The problem is technology got to their heads. It led to egotism, self-prowess, and the elimination of dependency upon a higher being. And that's why Avraham enters the world. Avraham enters the world right around Migdal Bavel. I think Migdal Bavel is 1996 or 1966 years into history. And Avraham enters into that world, and he helps people get past the broken culture. Another mashal, when Mordechai and Esther in Shushan Abira. So do you see anything horrible about the culture of Shushan until Haman comes and manipulates everyone and weaponizes? But it's a culture that's morally decayed. 180 days of endless partying in public view, gorging with food and vomiting so everyone could see B'chatzar Ginas Bisan HaMelech. It's a rancid culture. And that's why Mordechai and Esther and Chazal are compared to air fresheners. Hadassah, he Esther. Mordechai, Mordura, like refreshing the smell. So sometimes our tafkid is not only religious, as you and I would say, but it's also cultural, that we have to stand for values that have been ruptured. So this is part of the war. I'm not surprised that postmodernism, or some people call it post-structuralism, or some people call it wokeism, hyperliberalism. I'm not surprised that it's part of this battle, because that's who we are. That's what Kadosh Baruch Hu expects of us. So that wasn't your question, but what's happened? There are three things that have led to the modern world of postmodernism. One is democracy. Democracy stresses the individual, my own feelings, my own liberty, my own vote, my own money, my own capitalism. It stresses the individual over the collective. Number two, in the 20th century, there were two very violent attempts to impose collective thought on people. One was Nazism, one was Stalinism or Soviet communism. So people in the 21st century are very traumatized by collective ideas. Everyone has to each their own. Each person stands for themselves. And the third part is the internet, because we don't live in communities anymore. I guess Lakewood is probably a tighter community than some other places, but many, many people don't have communal life, which means that the common values that we all shared in the past, family, gender, identity, are no longer compelling for people because of democracy, because of the internet. And that's led to what people call postmodernism. It's too long to discuss now. It's probably of little interest to many people listening. But the core of it is there is no truth. Truth is a social construct. There's no good and bad. There's no moral and immoral. Every culture decides what story it wants to tell, what values it wants to assign as correct, and uses that social construct to educate people or propagandize people, which means that a terrorist can't be called evil because you have to see it from his standpoint. That's why you see these deans of upper learning. I'm laughing because I never thought that Harvard and Yale, believe me, I never see these places more. I've been in yeshivas with people who are people of upper learning, trust me. But some people who are deans of so-called prestigious institutions contextualize murder. Is it murder? Well, it depends upon the context. No, murder is murder. You don't murder someone innocently. So I'm not surprised that part of our battle, and it may not end with the war, Nachi. Maybe the war, let's say, will end, the military part will end, whatever. This could go on for decades, but there has to be a recalibration. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, remember, the end point of history for a Yid is not the annihilation of every other person aside from the Yidden. The evil people are wiped off the earth, but most people see the Ad Hashem, see the Kvod Malchuso, come to Yerushalayim, and are standing in Yerushalayim and around the area singing HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So we don't want to kill people. We want to inspire them and correct their behavior. So I'm not surprised.
Right, but the follow up to that is, I mean, something that you discuss as well is the do we believe in the elimination of those who oppose us? We're recording this when what's going on in Lebanon and Nasrallah, and we've seen what's gone on with Hamas and with all of that. So what do we believe in when it comes to that? And this really is going to tie us into Yemais HaMashiach and Geulah and the other book in Geulah. As a transition here, we'll talk more about that. But
okay, look, you have to be very careful, very, very careful not to migrate to either extreme. So let's start from the beginning. Humanism, belief in the goodness and the virtue of human beings, is part of being an Oved Hashem. Vayar Elokim Kitov says twice in the sixth day. Shlomo Melech repeats it. Elokim asas Adam Yashar v'hem bikshu cheshbonot rabim. We believe that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave every human being Tzelem Elokim, and part of that Tzelem Elokim is goodness and virtue. So first of all, I understand we're living in a point in history where some Yidden have a very negative view of non-Yidden, and sometimes that negative view borders on racist statements. That's not part of being an Oved Hashem. Part of being an Oved Hashem is Mechaber Esabrios, in part because of chesed and politeness, in part because they're Yitzirei Kapav Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, some people take humanism to too far of an extreme. They can't imagine that people could ever do evil because everyone is good. And if everyone is good, how could they be guilty of such atrocities? That's why you see a lot of hyper-liberals today shouting at the Jewish people. How could Hamas, how could they be so atrocious and demonic and horrific? It must be that Israel committed a first sin that was so egregious and was so horrible that it warrants the resistance, which you and I call rape, mutilation, and murder. They're calling resistance because we're the occupiers and we're apartheid and we're the genocidists and we're the imperialists and we're the Western. So runaway humanism is what's fueling a lot of the Israel sentiment because it's easier to find the devil than to see the devil in every man. And that's one danger. On the other hand, we believe that B'Yemos HaMashiach, again, I said this before, I'll say it again, V'yeda kol pa'ul ki ata pe'alto, v'yavin kol yitzor ki ata yitzarto, v'yomar kol asher neshama b'apo. That sentence means that they're not going to die. They're going to have a neshama b'apo, and they're going to say, Hashem Elokei Yisrael Melech. So we don't believe in Armageddon and apocalyptic removal of all people. Of course, the Rishayim, Yovdim in Haaretz, Itamu Chatam in Haaretz, Rishayim Oreinam. The Rishayim won't live to see the end of days, but it's not like the only people in the end of days are going to be. And by the way, the irony is, that's what makes Yiddishkeit the most universal religion. People have a hard time with this because, chosen people, you're racist, you're bigoted. In Christianity's endgame, everyone becomes a Christian or is eliminated. In Islam's endgame, everyone who's a Muslim is eliminated, and they've already started that project by trying to eliminate the infidel. We're the only religion. We have no interest in missionarizing or being Megayer anyone. A ger comes, we're Marchagosa, Kalas V'chamuros. We try to distance them. So the irony is we're the most universalistic religion, but our universalism has to start with a deep, deep commitment to living the message HaKadosh Baruch Hu expects of us.
So there's more to we're basically going to get to Geulah a little bit more. I know that's really tied into this. That's really your newer book, and it's really tied in. So that's really why we're discussing it here. But I want to ask you something else, something that you discuss in your first book about the one that's focused on October 7th, is really something that jumped out at me, where you discuss as a chapter titled "United by Action, Not Words," and you talk about. I want to find what you say here. You wrote, "We've all considered the pressing question, what will the day after look like in Gaza? What political arrangement in Gaza can provide Palestinian stability without threatening Israel? A different but equally important version of this question is, what will the day after look like within our society? Will we revert back to division and discord, or will we preserve our current condition of unity? We're all in search of a magic solution to preserve our resuscitated national solidarity." I think that's a very interesting point, and you go on to discuss there in that article. I'm sure you've thought about this much more than really what you just wrote in a few pages there.
Look, I think more important than any answer I give to that question is it's crucial in general, but particularly here, not to get caught in cliches. When you use cliches and catchwords, I call them meaning blockers. You just say words, they don't mean anything. And sometimes, especially in Hebrew, I remember a long time ago, Talmud said he's having problems with Kavanah during Kriya Shema. So I said, okay, so let's sit together. Let's read Kriya Shema together. So he said, Shema Yisrael. I said, what does that mean? Hear, O Israel. I said, are you Irish? Just don't loose translate. What does it mean to you? What does it mean in the 21st century? How does Kabbalas Malchus Shemayim, what words would you use to personalize it while sticking to the Nusach of Anshe Knesset Geulah? So I can't tell you how tired I am of hearing people say the word Achdus without then saying, well, what is Achdus? What are the different types of Achdus? There's one type of Achdus where I say, you know what? Your lifestyle is different from mine, but we have to play together in the sandbox, so let's respect one another's place. There's another Achdus where I say, you know what? Your life cross-pollinates with mine. It enhances mine. You're doing things that I can't do. So I live, for example, I told you this before, I don't want to dig too deeply into the weeds of Haredi and not. It's such a touchy issue today, and it's going to add more ugly language and more hateful language. But there's no question that a world that creates a pyramid whose apogee is Talmud Torah and everything is sloped to Talmud Torah will create excellence in Torah that a world that I live in will not be capable of because we're diffusing and diversifying our resources into army, into society, into community. You know, what time is it now? It's 3:13 and Friday in Lakewood. There's just, look at Shabbos, but if it weren't Shabbos, there's just been another sefer published in Bnei Brak. And if we wait another 5 minutes, there'll be another sefer published. And I buy those firm and I learn those firm and I'm enriched by them. Again, without getting too deeply into a very raw issue. Then there's a level of Achdus where HaKadosh Baruch Hu can't be contained by a human mind. There is no one person. I tell my Talmidim, if any Rebbe uses the following word, walk out the door. If any Rebbe says this is the emes, he's not just morally irresponsible, he's intellectually bankrupt because no one can see the totality of Rebbeinu Shalom. It's impossible. You're seeing a part of him, I'm seeing a part of him, Avijah Zachatza is seeing part of him, Alababich Zachatza is seeing part of him. That means that intellectual humility, when I feel the presence of Kiddush Hashem, means that I realize my truth is only partial, which is at the heart of Gemara. Anyone that's learned Gemara knows this instinctively. There's no one answer to a sukkah. There are 45 answers in the Rebbeinu Shalom's world. It's all true. I don't know if any of your listeners, but there was a movie that was popular a couple of months ago. What was the guy's name who made the atom bomb?
Oppenheimer.
So his Rebbe was a physicist from Dutch physicist named Niels Bohr, but he was also a big philosopher. So he says something which I think nails it. He says, the opposite of a true statement is a false statement. The opposite of a profound statement is another profound statement. So you and I deal in true and false because we're binary. Can't be day and night. The bonus Shalom's Yotzer V'Choshech. So Hashem deals in multiple profundities, multiple truths. So, you're going to get to Shemayim, Bezos Hashem. You're not going to be able to choose your roommate. You may have to live with a Belz Chassid your entire eternity. And that's because there are many, many Chadarim in Olam Habah. So I think, before I get to your question, stop using the word Achdus as the last part of your sentence. Now, what does that mean to me? How do I translate it? What are the different levels? How does that, it's become such a Devar Torah ender. I wrote my books. So I remember one of the editors, he added a few words here and there. I said, please, don't ever use this word in any of my articles. Say that, may we merit. May we merit is the end of Devar Torah. And let's just end the Devar Torah with your idea. It doesn't have to be, everyone knows that you're hoping that we merit it. It's just people already, they stop listening once they may. So stop saying the word Achdus until you say, well, what does it mean? My article, I think that you referenced, said that the best way to achieve Achdus is just through our legs and our hands, not necessarily through our minds. It's by getting out in the field, working together, meeting each other, realizing that there are people, not just ideologies, realizing that there are good people, realizing that your way is not the only way. I think that if your next guest on your podcast, you should find a Chiloni Yid and a Haredi Yid who are involved in Zaka and who carried burnt and incinerated bodies into refrigerated trucks by the dozens. And they have a lot more to tell you about Achdus than I can, or any Rebbe or any Mussar Sefer, because they lived it and they felt it together and they broke through the labels that divide us into small little cells.
Now, let's turn a little bit to Geulah here. And, you mentioned earlier the Holocaust. You mentioned October 7th. That's a common, I think, statement you hear. October 7th, the Holocaust. I mean, there's obviously a lot of other tsorahs. We can talk about Crusades and Tachvatat and et cetera. Unfortunately, so many tsorahs throughout Klal Yisrael's history. But what lessons can we draw from that, comparing it? What do you think of when you hear those kind of statements saying, "Oh, October 7th," comparing it in whatever way you want, whatever they're trying to accomplish, those who make those statements. But what do we take out of it? How do we, fit that together? And then, you really, let's do that, and then we'll return to the Geulah, actually.
Look. First of all, can I ad-lib for a second, because you touched on a really important issue, and I really want to take this moment.
Sure.
To me, it's more important than anything I'll say. If it weren't clear already before October 7th, it was always clear to me. But if it weren't clear already before October 7th, it should be absolutely clear, that any Yid who uses the word Nazi about another Yid has been mechalal his peh and his lashon, tocham temes v'sayim enochi yoshev, and whatever tefillos go up to Shemayim, whatever Torah he learns, as the Rambam says in Hilchos Tshuva, Tarfanis Abafanav. And everyone has to be very, very careful about the way they use that word, because our generation grew up reading about Nazis, but now we faced Nazis. We face people who want to exterminate us. Lashman Largalabi. Everyone has to be very, in my opinion, when I hear someone using that word about another Yid, I walk out of the room. No part of the conversation could be more important than respecting the dignity and the honor of the people who were killed 6 million at a time. Similarly, because of that, you have to be careful not to call October 7th the Holocaust, because the Holocaust was a 5-year October 7th. Do you imagine 5 years straight of October 7th without anyone to defend? So, before I answer your question, those are two prefaces. I think on the one hand, it teaches us, as the Holocaust taught us, the Eish Kodesh, when he was in Warsaw, in 1940, I think it was, gave a shiur around Hanukkah time, and he said he doesn't know why everyone's making such a big deal about the Holocaust. As you said, Nachi, it's Tachvatat, it's the Inquisition, it's the Crusades, it's this, that, and the other. And a year later, in 1941, when the situation got much, much worse, he said, now we know this is different. Now we know the Holocaust is a total different. And that's what I said before. I think most people in Am Yisrael believe that the Holocaust is something different, and it signals that history is changing. How you call that change in history depends upon your hashkafa. But I believe that most Yidden, most B'nai Torah believe that we're in a different stage of history, and at the end of Golus, the worst klala of Parshas Kisavo happened. V'yisa Meshuga mimare enecha sher tira, as the pasuk says in Parshas Kisavo. So I think seeing October 7th that way just reminds us that we're going through a historical shift. It also reminds us, and I think it's more for people in the community that I live in, that just because we're in a process of Geulah doesn't mean there aren't moments of Hester Panim. Doesn't mean that it's going to happen overnight. Doesn't mean that we can gamble or Ratzon Hashem. We believe we're started a process, but the process can have setbacks. And the process, just because something like this happens and it's horrible Hester Panim for 12 hours, doesn't mean that process has ended. It just means that Geulah doesn't mean an overnight chipazon. We had that once in history. We're not going to have it again.
I mean, this is something, going back, let's go back to one time in history. I mean, this is all over throughout Jewish history. Go back to the Spanish Inquisition and the expulsion of the Jews from Spain. The Barbanel wrote a famous Mashiach's trilogy, and, predicting Mashiach was going to come, I think, 1503. He talks about this extensively, Yeshua's Mashiachim, and Yeshua, Mashmiach Yeshua, and it didn't happen. So, I mean, we've seen this, as you point out.
Which means everyone has to be a little bit more modest, a little more tznius. What's the lashon of Koheles? Just, especially people in my community, I think, over the last 30, 40 years, like, it's Mashiach side, and if the Mashiach, and let's do this, and let's take this decision, and gamble, like Kodesh Baruch Hu. I'll give you an extreme. Obviously, I'm assuming everyone knows this is an extreme. Let's blow up the Har HaBayis, because that will then incite 200 million Muslims to attack. And we know Kodesh Baruch Hu will defend us because it's Mashiach side, so we're going to bring Mashiach. That's not our Masarah. Our Masarah is to be very, very humble and very, very conservative, and just to be, dream for Mashiach, try to advance it whatever way you feel you're advancing it, try to see the signs in history, but not to reach the point that, as the Rambam says, you'll know who Mashiach is when he comes. They'll know who he is only after the fact.
Right. So how do you deal with that in the book? Because I'm in the Geulah book, because Reclaiming Redemption, published through Mosaic, and although I don't think it'll be available at the time of this podcast, there is a link you can order, and I'll put that in the show's notes for those interested. And of course, I'll put a link to the October 7th book as well. But as we mentioned, the Barbanel, the expulsion from Spain, and we have Tach Fetad in 1648-49, and then you have Shapsei Tzvi, unfortunately, in 60, 65, 66. I mean, this has gone on. There's been many times we hear about there's the Tzara in Klal Yisrael, and then Mashiach is coming. It's the Geulah, and then it's not. So how do you deal with this? Is this something that you deal with in the book?
So Dafka Ipcha Mistavra, because of our tendency to myopically tunnel vision the entire conversation about Geulah as to when Mashiach is coming and what will he look like, and whether the Yankees will win the series beforehand or afterwards, I said, let's take a long view. We don't have a Masara about Geulah because it hasn't happened in 2,000 years. There's a prejudice in our Chazal against speaking about it. Rabbi Yochanan says, I don't want to live through it because he realizes how torturous it may be. So what I tried to do is have the book here, I could look at the table of contents. I tried to say, let's take a wide angle view as to what's going to change when we start Geulah, and let's develop a vocabulary, not necessarily opinions, yes or no. Like, how will it change our idea of peoplehood? What does it mean to be a Yid? Who do I see as Yidden? How can I look at Jews who are non-religious in the classic way and still create a greater Am Yisrael vision to incorporate them? In Eretz Yisrael, it's a lot different than it is in Lakewood. You and I are being defended by Jews who don't keep Shabbos in the classic way, but believe in Malchus Shemayim, say Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, Moshe Nebuchadnezzar Hashem. They're called in Israel Masarati, people who are traditional. How does our view of people change? How does Jewish identity change now that you're in Geulah? How does the view of Torah change? Obviously, Torah is Netzach, but will Torah be studied differently in the Eis HaGeulah? Our relationship to land. A lot of, remember when the three boys were taken kidnapped about 10 years ago? And the army tried to find their bodies? They found them? After 18 days, the people who give Tiyulim in Eretz Yisrael said, let us take over. And they know every rock and every pebble in Eretz Yisrael because they love the land so much. And they saw that a couple olive trees looked a little bit off. They said, there's something wrong here. And they found that those were olive trees that had been replanted upon the graves of these three boys that had been buried. And since then, the army started, I know people in that unit, I don't know the name of the unit, a special unit to track and to know Eretz Yisrael. So for some people, their avodas Hashem in part is expressed through Avas Eretz Yisrael. Not just Avas Am Yisrael and Avas Taras Yisrael, but literally the land and the ground and the trees and the rivers and the landscapes. So I'm trying to say we're moving into a new period. It could take 10 years, it could take 1,000 years. But let's start thinking about all the issues. How do we relate to non-Jews? For 2,000 years, that wasn't a question because we were being hunted like dogs. So our view of non-Jews were they're evil, they're Michel Zeldon. Now we live in a civil society, by and large, with upstanding people, and all of a sudden we have an Am Yisrael and a greater Am Yisrael. And I think that we have to recover. In the days of the first Beis HaMikdash, we were very universalistic. Shlomo Melech invites Chiram and invites Malchus Sheva. So what I'm trying to do in the book, in the Geulah book, is say, let's stop talking about when Mashiach's coming and what he's going to look like. And let's start talking about the consciousness and the mental space that's going to change when we enter a period of Geulah.
So something else that you discuss is the consciousness, our consciousness of Geulah. And why does that matter?
The Gemara says in Shabbos, when you come to Shemayim, Kadosh Baruch Hu will ask you a range of questions. Rav, I believe, Lamed Aleph. First question is, Nasatza v'natata b'emuna, were you ethical and honest? Second question is, Zakte pir v'rivia, you raised a family, Kavati dim latara. What's the fourth question? It's a piece of the Yeshua. A Yid is always expected to live in two worlds. He's always expected to embrace his world with its challenges, with its opportunities, but always realize that this is not the perfect world. I haven't been in Lakewood in a long time, but it's from what I've heard, it's amazing. I mean, the amount of Torah being learned and the community and B'nai Torah, but that's the trap, that you can be so successful in every area that you abdicate the sense that this is not perfect. We were not meant to be in Lakewood or in Teaneck or in Russia or in Spain. I don't have to tell you. There's a Masara, actually a Masara from the Sma Kadosh, that the reason that German Jews suffered so terribly throughout history, the Rhinelander and the Crusades, was that evidently Yidden went to Germany after the Churban Beis Hamikdash Rishon, which is amazing to think about because they really scattered. They didn't all go to Bavel. Some went to Mitzrayim, some went to Bavel, some went to Yemen. There were Jews that went to Germany. And Ezra sent them a letter to come back after the first Beis Hamikdash, Shivat Zion. And a lot of Jews, as you know, didn't come back. Only 42,000 came back. But the community of Germany, this is the 4th century BCE, 5th century BCE, they said, you go to Yerushalayim, we'll stay in Germany, which is the new Yerushalayim. And because they used that term, that's what the Shema says, the German Jews always suffered disproportionately. It's not just Germany. They said about Berlin, the famous Meshech Chachma, about Berlin's Yerushalayim. And I don't know if people use the term today, but Hashem doesn't want us to feel comfortable unless we're living in Eretz Yisrael. Tamid Anei Hashem Elokecha Ba. And for that matter, even me, I have this chus to live in Eretz Yisrael, but I'm not yet fulfilling Tamid Anei Hashem Elokecha Ba because we're still living through Hester Panim. So Hashem doesn't want us to be comfortable with our reality.
So as you started off the episode talking about how personal and how many people have suffered and continue to suffer throughout the, as you said, October 7th and its aftermath, you have an article in the book on October 7th, a very poignant piece, Inseparable in Life and in Death, talking about 2 Talmidim of yours that were killed. And I know you have family members participating in the ongoing war. And so really, how are we, and how we is a hard term here because there are people that some are affected more than others, obviously, but just globally speaking, if possible, how are we supposed to feel? It's a year now and still ongoing. It's October 7th, and now in Aseret Yemei Tshuva as well, that this podcast is being released.
I don't have an answer to that question for many reasons. First of all, I respect people. I respect other Yidden, and for me to tell everyone or to suggest how to behave is presumptuous. Even when I'm in America, I don't feel it as deeply as I feel when I'm in Eretz Yisrael. I'll be very honest with you. I'm terrified this year about Rosh Hashanah Kippur. I feel so immersed in the Tzara of Am Yisrael that I don't know how I'm going to sink into my own personal life and perform Viddur. I feel I can't. I don't know if I even want to. Like, how can I start thinking about I sinned in this respect, and I did this chait, and I improved this midah, and I didn't have enough keep it up aim. There's so many people that are suffering for me and for Am Yisrael and for you. I'm lost. I'm trying to find that bridge between those two voices. I really don't have it yet. I'm very scared because I know how to experience Rosh Hashanah Kippur. I don't know how to experience Rosh Hashanah Kippur this year. I like to tell people have found this very, very helpful. I've spoken about this to thousands of people in public settings. Could you imagine if you went to Eretz Yisrael and you came back to your local shtibel and Shmuel said to you, Yankala, how is Eretz Yisrael? He says, amazing. I saw my children. I went to a couple of koilos. I visited this, visited that. And how was the koisel? How was the kotel? I forgot to go to the koisel. You'd be embarrassed to show your face in public, right? You went to Eretz Yisrael, you land in Israel, the first stop you make is the koisel, and the last stop at the airport is the koisel. I would like every single person for the rest of their lives, whether they serve in the army, don't serve in the army, this hashkafa, that hashkafa, and you go to Eretz Yisrael, spend 15 minutes in Har Herzl. Just go visiting the graves of people that died on Kiddush Hashem to support our people. It's open 24/7. There are always families there crying, having ceremonies. There are always groups there. I call it the third mountain of Yiddishkeit. First mountain is Har Moriah. Second mountain is Har Sinai. This is not Kedusha Mila'ela. This is Kedusha Milatata. Am Yisrael. It has nothing to do with Hashkafa. You do serve in the army. You don't serve in the army. It's simply standing in the presence of people, the Makadosh Shem Shemaims, that your grandchildren one day could live there. Other than that, I don't know. Maybe if you see the names, it would help a little bit. Take a second. I'd be honest with you, before October 7th, this is what I recommended to people, but I can't say it anymore. I used to tell people that on the day that there's a terror attack in Eretz Yisrael, cancel your life down to its bare minimum. You have to go to work, you have to go to daven, to go shopping, but the thought that we're standing in front of freshly cut graves, burying Gibor Yisrael, and the country is flowing with rivers of tears, and you're in Yankee Stadium screaming your head off with 50,000 people cheering for people in pajamas hitting balls over the wall, that is a disgrace in Shemaim. I can't say it anymore because it's too frequent. And at a certain point, you have to unwind. I remember the day of the withdrawal from Gaza, whatever you want to call it. So I'm not a very wealthy person. I don't think I'm getting anything for this podcast. So we for the summers, there's no camp in Eretz Israel. My kids don't go to camp. So my wife and I splurged for one day to take them to an amusement park. That was our big splurge. And it's not, believe me, this amusement park is not great adventures. It's more like your local seesaw. But for us, that was the big splurge. So in 2005 or 6, whenever it was, we had bought tickets in advance. And it turned out, that day was the day that took everyone out of Gaza, the Yidden out of Gaza. And my wife and I sat there and labored and questioned, can we go? Can we not go? I'll be very honest. Lamaisa, we went because for our kids, it would have been, they didn't understand it. They were too young. So we took them. But I went with such a heavy heart. There are Yidden in Eretz Yisrael who are being forcibly removed from their homes. You agree, you disagree. And I'm sitting here in an amusement park listening to, kids. Okay, so it's for the children. If you can do that on a very, very difficult and dark day, believe me, it's worth the $500 that you throw in the garbage for your Yankee tickets or your Mets tickets or whatever.
Wow. So, like I said before, I will link to your book, Emunah Mitech HaAstor, Dark Clouds Above, Faith Below. That's the book on October 7th, the collection of, there's more things in there that, and things that jumped out to me that we didn't get to that were very interesting. One to mention is celebrating Tzahal, a lack of Emunah. I thought that was a very interesting piece and very worth reading. And like you say, really a lot of this is, like you said throughout the podcast, whether you agree or disagree, different hashkafas, there's some very interesting themes and ideas that one can see, especially with the current situation and what's been going on for the past year, unfortunately, So I will link to that. And I will also link to your other book, Reclaiming Redemption, which is forthcoming, or again, it might be available for order. I'm not sure at the time of release, but it's definitely available for pre-order for those interested. And perhaps we can do it.
I think in 2 weeks, like maybe October 15th, let's say.
Yeah, so again, the link on Mosaica Press's website definitely will be available, so I'll put a link, you can purchase it that way. And we can perhaps in the future talk more about the Geulah, but now we touched a little bit on it here. And, wishing everyone a Gmar Chasima Tova, and thank you, Rabbi Taragin, for joining me.
Gmar Chasima Tova. It's Nitzavim Vayelech. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu made us Nitzavim. We're here, we're resilient. And Vayelech. Let's Mirz Hashem move forward and move our people forward. And to the bracha of Abi Yisrael. So it's a bracha.
Amen. Thank you. Good. What did you let it upload? Did we get on most of the points?
Wow.